Okay, everybody. Hi, good morning. Thank you very much for joining me. My name's Justin Smith of Chameleon Training and Consultancy, and today's webinar is Kickstarting Income Generation in Your School. And just to explain, as I did mention, this is being recorded by ISBL, and as I say, it's a 50-minute time limit, so no time for questions, sadly, but please email me at the end or give me a call and I can share all the resources and answer any questions. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about income generation in schools and considering especially the impact that COVID-19 has had on our schools and particularly in our fundraising. We'll look at the ways that you can generate income, what I call the Wheel of Fortune. We'll look at business sponsorship and donations and grants. We'll talk about how you can develop a usable fundraising plan. And at the end, we'll just talk about next steps as well. Okay, so let's just have a little look at the fundraising landscape as it sits currently in our schools. It's extraordinary to think that we generate almost £2 billion collectively together by our schools. Now, most of that is through sort of unstructured fundraising from volunteers such as the PTA and the Friends Association, which is fantastic. Makes a huge difference in our schools. But you have to balance that out against the 46 billion that's generated by the charity sector, 30% of which improves the lives of children. Now, I'm not saying for one moment that we should compare ourselves with the charity sector because, of course, we're very, very different, but there are things that we can learn from them. And there are a number of things that I will talk about today, this morning, especially that perhaps we could consider, particularly when it comes to developing our fundraising campaigns in an emotive way, the trigger points that encourage people to donate and support what we do. So we'll certainly talk about that today. We know from research that only around 2% of business managers feel that we've got the time, especially, but also the skills and the competencies, the resources needed to raise sustainable new funds. And none of that is a huge surprise for any of us, I'm sure. And we know also that grant funding remains the traditional solution for schools. But many grant applications are unsuccessful, and we'll talk about that a little bit. We'll explain and unpick why that might be the case and things that you can do to improve your chances. But also just to think about, actually it shouldn't be the traditional solution for schools. Some research carried out by the University of Chester found that, this was just literally the other week, found that somewhere in the region of 50% of income for PTAs, friends associations and charities comes from events. So the fundraising events that we hold every year. Now, if you're focusing your fundraising attempts on the occasional event, which are fantastic, but also the occasional grant application, they're just 2 of 8 ways that schools can fundraise sustainably. And we know with COVID what an impact that's had in terms of the fact that we can't run face-to-face events. So we need to be a little bit more creative and sustainable in the things that we do. So again, the things that we'll talk about this morning will help to support some of that thinking. COVID-19, we've talked about their far-reaching impact, but many funders have suspended their programs. So Sport England, the National Lottery, for example, they have paused traditional funding programs. They're focusing on high-impact, localised, short schemes supporting COVID-related initiatives, quite understandably. But it means that if you're reliant on that grant fund, that's not going to be processed anytime soon, certainly up to this side of the autumn, that's for sure. So the over-reliance on grant funding should be avoided. It should be part of your scheme and your policy, but it certainly shouldn't make up the bulk of it. So don't panic, because we're going to be talking about a number of different things that you can do to support the other aspects of fundraising. So really, income generation is about taking control, and your strategy should sit alongside and support your whole school development plan. So you'll have a whole school development plan. You may have other plans that sit alongside that to support the initiatives that you want to develop in school. Your fundraising strategy should sit within that to support those longer term initiatives. You'll have some quick wins that you want to deliver in school. You'll also have some potential capital projects that you know you can't fund from your core budgets. So your fundraising strategy should sit hand in hand with your whole school development plan. So what have we learned? If I look back since March and we've had lockdown, how has that affected our fundraising and our income generation? Well, let's be honest, for most of us, it's affected it dramatically. And we've learned that communication is king, and it's exactly the same with your marketing. So how agile was your website? How agile was your communications with how you talk to your stakeholders, whether they're existing parents or future potential parents, or supporters and sponsors that want to come and support your school? So comms is absolutely king, and we've learned a lot in these last few months because our traditional way of communicating, mostly face-to-face, actually has been paused. So how about a few different ways of keeping people informed? Many of you will have newsletters in your school. There's no reason why you can't introduce a supporters newsletter for your fundraising. That would be branded just the same as your traditional newsletter, okay? But it's purely focusing on some of your fundraising. So you can introduce new campaigns, you can update on what's happening with the current ones, you can inform people of your upcoming events and initiatives and different dates for their diaries. You can persuade people to support you, and I'll show you in a second how you can do that. And of course, most importantly, you can celebrate success and the impact people's donations have had. People are far more likely to support you if they can understand and see that their donation or their volunteer time is going towards a specific project. We all like legacy projects. We like to walk into our local school and see something that we've had a part to play in. So if you can focus your initiatives on that library refurbishment or your outdoor gym or things like that have a physical presence, people will get behind that. They can see the difference it makes. So perhaps setting up a simple newsletter, and I've done that with a number of schools, particularly primary schools recently, because they found that actually this is a great way to focus people's attention. And it doesn't distract from your normal newsletter where you've got all the other stuff and you don't want it to sort of get lost in the mix. So again, a very simple template, which I can help you with if you need any help. Branded, so it looks professional, but it just keeps people informed, particularly at the moment when people are desperate for news. So again, what else have we learned? Well, we've learned particularly to digitize our fundraising. What does that mean? So again, this is that over-reliance on having face-to-face events. They should be part of our plan, but they shouldn't be all of it. So your website is always going to be your primary platform of communication. Okay, and we've learned a lot, haven't we, since March in terms of just how agile our website has been, and some of you will have different experiences, I'm sure. But that's the place where you can hang all your projects from. So if you had a tab on your homepage that said support us, somebody could click on that and they could learn more about your projects. So they can download some facts about the particular initiative. Perhaps there's a crowdfunding page that you could link to, and we'll talk about crowdfunding in a minute. But you could have online donations and gift aid forms. I can point you to sites where I can show you how this works, so don't worry about that at the moment. This is about the concept and the mindset of introducing this way of fundraising, because of course this will continue despite crisis. So you can continue with your fundraising and your communications if it's digital. You can demonstrate the impact donations have. That's incredibly important so people understand the difference they make. And of course, this does compensate for that reliance on events and grants and gives you that sustainability that you need for long-term fundraising. Social media, most of us, about 60% of us have Facebook or Twitter accounts in schools. So it's a great way to just keep people involved and informed. And maybe we can use this time to just sketch out a storyboard campaign where you can get your children involved in a short promotional video to support one of your fundraising projects. And I'll put a link here and I'll send you the slides. But there's a link here to a local school to me in Norfolk where they did a really fantastic crowdfunding campaign with a lovely video led by the children, not overly polished or professional, but it was still very good. And it was very successful. So again, just thinking about this could be time over the summer where we think about who we could get involved, what we would fundraise for, and how we might do it. And sketching out a simple storyboard to show the process for this 3 or 4 minute video is an ideal time to do that at the moment. So again, we're just thinking with your fundraising plan exactly how we might improve some of our long-term sustainable efforts as opposed to relying on sort of knee-jerk scattergun reactions to fundraising, which quite frankly don't work and they're not particularly effective. I loved this quote, so I just wanted to share it with you, and some of you may have seen it before. Your best ambassadors and advocates are your kids, really, and your staff. So if you can engage with them and get them on board and involve them at the very start, then they'll be with you. And I never forget being in a staff room at a school I worked in and just asking if anybody might have some experience or some time to help me with the project. And a couple of hands went up, and one of them was a lady who was currently a TA, but in her former life she was involved in fundraising for a major charity, a cancer charity. So, of course, she had a huge amount of experience and knowledge that she brought to the table and really supported us with some of our fundraising efforts. So, again, don't make the mistake I made early on in my school career, which was to develop a fundraising plan and then not really share it with anybody. I thought it was great, but I never got people involved enough, and I soon learned that that wasn't the right way to do it. And as John Stuart Mill says, one person with a belief is equal to 99 who only have an interest. So bring people with you, get them involved, and more importantly, get them to believe in what you're doing, because they will carry that message for you. So there's a bit of marketing and income generation, there always is. So I want to introduce you to this concept which I developed. Some of you may have seen before. I call it the Wheel of Fortune, and hopefully that's pretty evident when I show you. These are all the ways that schools can fundraise. Most of us concentrate on grants and perhaps events and that sort of thing. But to some extent, all of us, whether we're a small special school or a large secondary as part of a MAT or whichever part of the country you're in, all of us can consider these segments of fundraising. And I'm going to pick on 2 or 3 of these and go through them with you. Some of you may look at this and think, well, there's no way I can engage with my alumni. That's just not going to happen because we're a small rural primary school and that's just too far removed for us. And that's fair enough, and that may well be the case. But we shouldn't discount all of these, because there are some fantastic stories of schools that I know of and have worked with where they're doing things that you just wouldn't imagine they would do. They're engaging with communities, they're getting former students back into the school to talk about their careers and opportunities, and that leads into other things. So consider these for sure, because you never know where they might lead, and they all support telling a story which you can tell to a grant funder. They want to know about your holistic, rounded approach to fundraising. And if you can tell the story of your fundraising based on a number of these different ways of doing that, then that will all help support what you do. So one of the things that we talk about at the very start is understanding the context to which you operate in. And so what I mean by that is, as I said at the start, we're all working in different environments with different schools, and we have different challenges. So if you can conduct a SWOT analysis, where you're looking at your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, then you're in a position where you can understand your challenges and you can understand where you might need to go to try and exploit the opportunities. What we're trying to do is move our weaknesses to strengths and our threats to opportunities. So here's a SWOT, an example of a SWOT of a school that I've worked in, and I've just altered it slightly to make the point, really. So this particular school has an engaged and active PTA group. They're very popular, they've got parental engagement, and they work with a number of suppliers, and there's business community around them. I think they had a business park not too far from the school. So lots of positive strengths in terms of fundraising there. The other side of the coin was that they didn't have a plan. So they didn't really know what their priorities were. They thought they knew, but in terms of fundraising, they hadn't really drilled down and understood those. And they had a bit of a scattergun approach to fundraising. So a lot of it was led by governors and senior staff, and it sort of bounced from one thing to another. And the problem with that is that it's really inefficient. And if you keep going to the same people asking for support, you end up with what's called donor fatigue, where people just get a bit fed up because they've already given 25 quid for this or 50 pounds for that. So the best thing to do is to have a plan and to think about what you need and why. And when you start to understand your priorities, it's really quite interesting, because you'll be able to work out what your short-term aims are, what your longer-term aims are, and you can work your plan towards it. And I'll go through shortly what a plan looks like, and I've got a template, which is a blank template that you can use and adapt for your school if you'd like it, so I can send that over to you, it's no problem. So again, if we can understand our weaknesses, then we can start to address those and turn them into strengths. Again, with this particular school, if we're looking at opportunities, we can perhaps look at establishing a fundraising team. And I'll never forget one of the first schools that I worked with when I set up as a freelance. And it was a school in London, and I sat with a lady who was in the primary, and she said, "Justin, I'm on my own. I don't think I can get anybody to support me." And I said, "Well, just think about this, this, and this." And I went away, and within about 3 or 4 days, she emailed me back to say, "I've got a team of 4 or 5 people, including a couple of children and a parent." And suddenly, when you start to ask the question and you can explain to people the difference they can make, and you divide up that time so there's not too much onus on any one person, then you'll be quite surprised with the number of people that can support you. So a fundraising team is a great way of helping that to happen. And again, opportunities with this particular school, engaging with business and suppliers are always your first port of call. Talk to them first about sponsoring a project. So what are the threats? Well, missed opportunities. So if we don't really know what we need, and more importantly, why we might need it, and we haven't drilled down to understand the why, then we could miss out on some local grant funding that comes available because we're not ready. So again, planning helps you put together those impact statements, helps you put together some of your arguments, and you're ready to go when funds suddenly crop up. And as I said at the bottom, understanding the real need and how others can support us really does help grant applications, because if you can develop some of this narrative now and understand why you need a particular initiative in your school and bring in people to support that with endorsements and testimonials, then that's fantastic, because that's the sort of thing grant funders will want to see from you anyway. So it's worth doing that. So SWOT analysis, if it's done honestly and genuinely, can be really useful to understand where your opportunities may lie to develop your plan. So what I'm going to do now is just pick through one of two of those segments that we saw on the Wheel of Fortune. And the first one I'm going to talk about is crowdfunding. And you'll notice with these, we refer to high, medium, and low repeatability. So by that, I mean low repeatability would be a grant, because if you apply to the lottery one year, then perhaps you won't be able to apply until the following year. So that's a low repeatability income stream. High repeatability are things like lettings, because that's a regular income, and crowdfunding, because you can run multiple campaigns regularly. So many of you will know, but most of us don't use crowdfunding in schools yet, although it's becoming more popular. But it's a great way to engage community. So if you're working in a school that's got parental involvement and you've got communities around you, this is a great way to support what I would term a small to medium-sized project. So anything up to, I mean, there's no hard and fast rule, but in my experience, anything up to about £5,000-6,000 tends to be a really nice number to work with crowdfunding. If you're trying to save up £50,000 for a pitch, an artificial pitch, then a crowdfunding campaign is unlikely to yield that sort of response, obviously. But for small projects, outdoor gyms, library refurbishments, etc., that's a great way to do it. And you can choose your funding target and your time scale. You'll have a dedicated web page for your project. You can choose whether you want one-off or regular donations or both. You'll have gift aid built in, GDPR is built in. The campaigns that you set up on this particular page can be shared to your website, of course, and your social media platforms. Just a couple of examples. Donate My School is really popular, and they've set that up specifically for schools, hence the title. It's free to set up, but they will take 3% fee for all the funds that you raise. So if you raise £100, their fee would be £3, for example. Crowdfunder is obviously incredibly popular, and again, is an option. And there are a number of different options, but certainly there's just a couple there. It's worth you just exploring. I would strongly suggest crowdfunding if you've got a really good community and people that are engaged in your school. Primary is, of course, very effective at this. It's a great way to fundraise for a project and get people behind you. So again, if you need any advice, I can help you with that. So that's crowdfunding. Donations and gift aid, again, it's all part of the crowdfunding idea, which is that you're trying to encourage people to support you with regular or one-off donations. And again, if you've got a strong story to tell and you can demonstrate clearly the difference people can make, then you're going to get the support that you need. And remember, the term donations refers to voluntary giving, so it's non-refundable, doesn't result in any goods or services being provided. So that's the terminology of a donation. Gift aid is not complicated, but I do have a PowerPoint presentation specifically on gift aid, which shows different scenarios for schools. So if you're doing a particular event, can you claim gift aid, that sort of thing, and there's a flow chart. If anybody wants more information on gift aid, then again, I can send you that PowerPoint separately. I think it's really important with any donations to remove the barriers to support. So what I mean by that is enabling people to support you easily. So whether that's popping into school and filling in a form and handing over a check, or whether it's something online where they can click and donate electronically, there's loads of platforms that enable you to do that. Make it easy for people to give you money and support you. Your PTA, of course, is a great vehicle for raising funds and raising the profile of the school. If they earn over £5,000 a year, then they should register as a charity and they can claim gift aid. And of course, they'll also be able to apply for some of the grants from the supermarkets like Asda and Morrison's. They have their own charitable giving arms, and you have to be a charity, and PTAs are especially welcome to apply to those. So again, lots of information there. I can provide, as I say, a separate presentation on gift aid if you're interested, but the key for donations is always about explaining why you need people's support. The fact that, very little donation of £10, £20 is very welcome, and that makes a difference. And if you can do that and allow people to support you and make it easy, then you're removing those barriers. And of course, that's a high repeatability income stream because it can be a regular thing delivered from your website. Business involvement and engagement, sponsorship, again, opportunities for local businesses and suppliers. Talk to suppliers first. You've got a transactional relationship with them already. Okay, so you're spending money with them. So get in touch with them directly and personally. So it's not, dear supplier, will you support us? This is, dear Justin, thank you for supporting our school. We'd like to invite you to sponsor this fantastic new initiative. Something like that is going to be far more engaging to a supplier than just, dear supplier, will you help us, for example. And I've seen that, by the way, which is why I reference it, because it is so important not to make that mistake. This isn't a scattergun approach. This is you selecting a number of organisations that you feel comfortable with to potentially support you. You will acknowledge their involvement with a donations board and celebration events that you'll invite them to. And here's just a few ideas. So I can send you examples of sponsorship packages and sponsored advertising. A business directory is where you would have a page on your website, again, perhaps called Sponsor Us or Support Us, where you would divide that up into tiles, perhaps 10 on a screen, and each one representing a business, and they can buy that space, and you would have a logo, you would have the link to their website, and perhaps 2 lines of text as to who they are and what they do. Remember, parents run businesses. Remember, you've got suppliers. So it shouldn't be too difficult to choose 10 that you're comfortable with and charge them, £200, £250 each a year. That could be £2,500 of regular sustainable income that you can put towards projects to buy laptops or whatever it might be. So again, just thinking about ways that people can support you and help you, removing the barriers. And at the end of the year, you would write to those organisations to thank them for the support, tell them what you've done with the funding and how you've invested it and the difference it's made for the children, and then you would ask them would they like to continue that for next year. And everybody's going to say yes, because it's only £200, so why not? So again, just being a bit imaginative. I can show you links of schools that are doing this really successfully. Similarly, the Buy a Brick campaign you'll know about. What about sponsoring a metre square through our Muga, our multi-use games area? So dividing your pitch up into metre squares and asking people to sponsor each one for £50 or £25 or £100 if you're an affluent area. Again, it's just being a bit imaginative and getting people involved. And remember, some sizable businesses locally will have corporate social responsibility aims. So they will be responsible for ensuring that a proportion of their profits gets donated to good causes. Well, there's no reason why your school can't be a good cause. Some of you may want to consider alumni engagement. So it's worth thinking about this, reaching out to former pupils and thinking about how they can support your current kids. Anniversaries, centenaries, they're a great opportunity to invite people back. Maybe it's 10 years since you opened a particular building, or 25 years, or whatever it might be. Interesting stat, 130 million donated to private schools. So, why not state schools? 30% of state school alumni, most of us probably, said that we would donate to our former school if we'd been asked, but only 1% of us have ever actually asked. Could I ask you please to mute yourselves if you're not on mute? So I can hear quite a bit.
We've tried. Reggie's mum's tried to log in as Reggie. Won't let us sign in.
Mute yourselves. That would be.
And then we've just tried to sign in as another child. We picked a child and tried to sign in.
So we found that around 100 million could be raised by state schools every year. Only 1% of us have actually been asked. So that's incredibly important to consider.
Do you want to ring me?
I was going to say, do you want me to? Yeah.
Could you mute yourselves, please? If someone.
I'm just thinking, I don't want to send them out and then every single parent saying, "It won't let me on."
Yeah. There's the numbers there.
Fine.
Yeah.
Another option is to consider buildings and facility hire. So that's a high repeatability income stream. One of the most popular ways of generating income, and of course it's a regular income. What I would say is that there's no need to reinvent the wheel. So if you could, I'm more than happy to send you some examples of risk assessments and the way that you can manage the safety and security of your lettings on site. There's loads of stuff available. So you should really consider it. But here are things that you can add value to lettings if you've got facilities that you know you can hire out. So developing specification sheets for each facility. So if you're hiring out a room, think about taking a photo, measuring your dimensions, room layouts and equipment, that sort of thing. So again, it just professionalizes your offering. You would put that onto a sheet, you put your brand, your logo, your school logo in the corner, and if somebody's interested in hiring a facility, then you've got that information to hand. It can be printed out and left on reception. It can be made available from your website. Same with your booking forms and terms and conditions and your hire charges. Make sure they're in store colours and you've got your logo on there as well. Checking pricing against local competition. So highlight key features of your particular facility. And remember to review your hire charges. Check your heating, your lighting and your caretaking costs. Really important. I went into school before lockdown and they hadn't done that for 6 years and they were losing money on their facility hire. It was absolutely heartbreaking. So for goodness sake, check these basic things. I know most of you do, but if you can add value with a specification sheet and branding your booking forms, it makes such a difference. Just whilst it's quiet, again, just a quick reminder, please mute yourselves so we don't hear the background noise. Thank you. Okay, so we'll move on to grants and trust funds. Low repeatability for the reasons that we mentioned earlier, in that if you've applied for a fund and you were successful, then you won't be able to apply probably for at least another year. So it's a low repeatability income stream, but it is one of your 8 segments that you can consider for sure. And it's interesting to know that there's £1.5 billion available every year for schools to bid for. Over 4,000 funders in the UK, thousands of grants and trusts available on a national, regional and local scale. And of course, they're the ones that we know about. There are thousands more that won't appear on a grant finder website or in the grants Bible that's produced every year. Probably no surprise to anybody, all are heavily oversubscribed. And just to give you a little bit of a taste for this, but don't worry, there's a happy ending. In the summer of 2018, the Garfield Weston Anniversary Fund, and you may know of Garfield Weston, they're a large charity that supports, they're a charitable trust, they support schools and charities for all sorts of different reasons, but they had a fund to celebrate an anniversary, I think it was 75 years, and it was a capital fund, so you could bid for capital funding, which was, like gold dust. And they had applications to 2,300 schools, which were total £200 million, and they had 11 million, so they were able to support 150 of those 2,000 odd schools. Now, they had a prize fund initially of 7 million. They upped it to 11 because of the quality of applications. So this stat goes to show what we're up against when it comes to grant funding. So those of you that have been successful with grants, well done, congratulations. It's tough, it really is tough. But, and here's the big but, between May and July of last year, almost half of the applications to Lottery Reaching Communities Fund were ineligible. So what does that mean? It means 46% of every application they received during that time frame, and that time frame was just picked at random, that's typical throughout the year, okay, were from applications applying for funds that this particular fund could not support even if they wanted to. They were ineligible. So if you look at Awards for All from the lottery, many of you will be familiar with that, £10,000 a year for schools and charities for community-based projects. So Awards for All, a fair proportion, almost again between 35 and 45%, fail at phase 1 at the first level. And the first level looks at some of the basic detail. It looks at whether the head teacher has signed the application, whether it's met one of the 3 eligibility criteria that were very obvious on the front page of the website, whether you've completed the application form and answered the questions. So they're not making a judgment at that stage on the quality of your application. That's phase 2. And yet more than a third are failing at that phase because we haven't applied for a fund to meet the eligibility criteria, which is an absolute travesty. We don't have the time to waste on applying for things that we can't get in the first place. So again, you can turn that into a positive. If you've worked out your plan and you understand what you need and why, and you're putting time into your fundraising and you're understanding which grants you can apply for because you've applied to a grant finder website and you're paying your £100 subscription a year, and we'll go through that later, then you'll understand what you can apply for and when. So again, just putting a bit of time and effort into thinking saves this. And if you know that 46% are being chucked out straight away, then that gives you a much stronger chance of being successful. So I told you there was light at the end of the tunnel. So here's some quotes from this. This is the National Lottery is saying that, the main reason applications are rejected is because they fail to show how the lives of beneficiaries will be improved. The Joseph Rowntree Trust are saying that many applications don't give an explanation about the strategy for achieving change or a clear indication of what we're trying to achieve. And Gilly Green from Comic Relief said funders want a cohesive story, evidence of demand for service and the outcomes it will create. So again, look, the same words are cropping up. Evidence of demand, outcomes, clear indication of what we're trying to achieve and why. Every time these come up. So when I run my bid writing course, Winning Bids, we go through this because this is absolutely fundamental and critical for your application. If you don't get these right, then you don't get past the first stage, and that's a dreadful waste of time. It takes no extra time getting it right than it does to get it wrong. So get it right in the first place, and then you've got a fighting chance. So where do you go for funding, for grants particularly? Well, you've got your grant finder databases. So many of you will be familiar with those. They're paid subscription services. They're updated regularly. They're very easy to use because you've got various filters. So you can put in there, your location in terms of your geography, where you are in the country. You can put the type of fund that you're looking for, the type of project that you're looking to support. So grant finder websites, there's a few there. I mean, the top two I use, and they're really good, Funded. Many of you will know the community-inspired guys at Funded. They've got a fantastic magazine and the PTA Plus magazine that comes out as well. They've got a good database. Pebble run the Arrow system, again, a very intuitive database that's kept up to date all the time. So it's worth subscribing to one or either of those. The other two I know of, Grants for Schools, I've used. Again, it's fine. And there's others. So again, you just need to have a little search yourselves and find out what works for you. One thing I would say is that don't bother in shelling out your £100 or however much it costs until you've done your plan. So do all your sort of homework first before you start to think about what might be available in terms of your grants. Think about local authority. On your website for your local authority, there will be a page that says something like grants for charities or education, something like that. There's bound to be that. There is in every one I've looked at. So they're free to access because it's just a page on your local authority website. I don't know how frequently they would be updated and how that is managed. So you just need to consider that. And don't forget that your local community funds, there will be lots of grants available that are very specific for your community and your locality. And they won't advertise themselves particularly well. They won't have fancy websites maybe, and they won't appear on a grant finder database, I'm sure. But of course, you'll know about them because you've marketed your campaigns effectively. You've told people, your parents and your staff and your kids, what you're fundraising for and why. And because of that, word will spread and they're more likely to come to you and say, well, did you know? I mean, I've had this situation in schools I've worked in. People have come up to me and said, well, did you know we've got a £500 grant? You just need to fill in this A4 sheet and you can apply, So something very simple like that will come to you if people know what you need and why. So very quickly, we're going to talk about developing a plan. Most of us felt that it's important or very important to have some sort of plan. But again, surveys tell us that only about 6% of us do have a plan. And the reason we don't have a plan at the moment is because we don't have time. So, you have to ask yourself the question, when am I going to have time? This year hasn't been any easier than last year, that's for sure. Next year won't be any easier. So we need to make time. And the template that I can send you is very, very simple, and you can just populate it with stuff that you'll know. And if you don't know it, you can go out and find it over time. So it's worth putting time and effort up front, just a little bit of, not a huge amount of effort needed, but you need to put this in to get the plan set up to give you the better chance then of understanding whether crowdfunding works for you or whether a grant is the right thing. So again, think about setting that up. So how does a plan look? Very simply, initially, you have your executive summary at the start. You'll have your context where you do your SWOT analysis. The executive summary, by the way, is just the purpose of your plan. That's just a few bullet points on the first page, just so you understand precisely what you're trying to achieve. Then you'll have your plan itself, where you talk about your operational needs now, effectively, what you're going to achieve in the next year. That could be setting up a fundraising team and looking at your prioritising your projects. Then your medium and your longer term. Your longer term would be some of those capital development things the aspirational projects that you may have in your mind. You'll get into the meat of the program then in terms of your plan. You'll look at those individual projects, the timescales involved, and the impact each of them will have, because that will help drive your priorities. And then your resources, who can support you. Think about other people you can bring on board that can add value. Think about your governing body and trustees that have got perhaps some time to go away and do some research on some local projects, because they've lived in the area for all their life, let's just say, and therefore they know people. So again, bring people on board and get them to support. And then the last part of the plan is always our measurement and reflection. So in other words, what worked and what didn't, and why. So why didn't that sponsor? Why did not one of our suppliers that we've known for many years, why did they not buy one of our bronze sponsorship packages? Well, if we don't know, let's go and ask the question and find out, so we can develop and modify and adapt our plan accordingly. So that's really important, to look back and see what works and understand that. If you get rejected on a grant bid, you'll have a standard letter. Phone the funder and ask. Many of the national funders especially are very good. They'll have regional contacts. They'll have local, people in your area that you can talk to specifically and get feedback. I remember a big CIF, Condition Improvement Fund project I was leading when I was at Wyndham College in Norfolk. And the school had a rejection 2 years running, and I joined the school and put the bid in and got another rejection. So I had a chat with the CIF team and found out why, and we weren't far off. We needed to tweak some of our information, and we eventually got the project over the line. And just now the school are building a new maths block, so that's happening. So again, it's always worth picking up the phone, asking the question, try to find out where you can improve things up front. So that was a very quick whistle-stop tour of fundraising and income generation in schools. As I said at the start, we are tight for time. We've got a 50-minute time span for this, so I've got probably another 5 minutes or so. But please email me for any of the resources, templates, and if you've got any questions, please get in touch. I'll leave this slide up so you've got my contact details. More than happy to support you with anything that I can. I've worked in schools for 20 years and I've now run my own business for 3, secured £7 million for schools that I've worked with in a variety of different ways. More than happy to support you. So just some free advice over the phone, that's okay, or any thoughts that you've got, happy to help. If you want to engage me to support your schools, then of course I can. My website has got some videos, so short, bite-sized videos on crowdfunding and different things. So they're only 2 or 3, 4, 5 minutes long. So if you want to have a quick look at those, that might be useful as a catch-up. But as I say, please phone me if you need any other help. But hopefully you found that very useful. And as I said at the start, ISBL will have a recording of this webinar on their website. So there's a link, and I think they'll probably send it to you or certainly make it available. So it's there. So I'm going to turn off the recording now.